Cleetus McFarland continues to be brought up in the conversations for the Dodge program for 2026, and Richard Childress confirms he will not be retiring at the end of 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ross Chastain's 2025 Busch Light Camo scheme that we'll see next weekend or a couple weeks in from now at Talladega. Honestly, I like the look of this car quite a bit. I think the track outstocked this one out of the park. The camo on it looks fantastic. Looking forward to the racetrack at Talladega. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Christian Eckes' 2025 Camper Zing Pink scheme that we'll see this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. Car looks pretty good in my opinion. Not as strong as some other schemes we've seen for this week, but I think it looks solid. I think College Racing did a pretty good job on this one. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Carson Osemar's 2025 Moto Casino scheme that we'll see this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. The only difference is it looks like it's a little bit more of a paint tint on the car. I'm pretty sure outside of that's kind of very similar to other Moto Casino schemes we've seen for Carson Osemar this season. It does look alright though, and I do think the colors look decent in my opinion. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Preece's 2025 Totino scheme that we'll see this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. This is one of the better RFK racing schemes I think we've seen so far in 2025. The black, the gold, everything about this I think is phenomenal. I think they did a fantastic job in this one. It looks really good. Looking forward to the racetrack at Charlotte. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Justin Haley's 2025 STEM scheme that we'll see this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. This looks very similar to another certain scheme from another Chevy team, that being Trackhouse Racing, the jockey car. It looks like a little bit of a rip-off to me, to be honest, so I'm not the biggest fan of this one because it kind of looks similar to the jockey scheme. I think the jockey scheme is definitely way better than this one, in my opinion. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2025 Jordan Brand scheme that we'll see this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. I like the look of this car, to be honest. I think that there's been some awesome looking Jordan Brand schemes so far this year from 2311 Racing for Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace too. This one's no exception. I think this one's really, really good. I think that 2311 Racing absolutely knocked this one out of the park. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brendan Poole's 2025 MacDor Pink scheme that we'll see this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. I like this one quite a bit, to be honest. I think this one actually has some good look to it for sure. Love the pink look to it. I think Alpha Prime did a pretty solid job on this one for sure. Looking forward to seeing the racetrack this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tanner Gray's 2025 Factory Canopy scheme that we'll see on Friday at the Charlotte Roval for the truck race. I like the look of this truck somewhat. It's not my favorite scheme for sure from the Tricon Garage team, so I think Tricons had better ones for sure this year. I think it's a solid one. It's not great though by any stretch of imagination, but I think it's definitely decent in my opinion. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Sieg's 2025 Bandit scheme that we'll see this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. Looks alright, colors are decent, not fantastic. I think the colors look alright. I think there's some things I'm not the biggest fan of this one for sure, but I think it's a decent looking car, but it's not great, but it's definitely a decent looking car overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're unfortunately taking this episode to a sour note, as it was sadly announced, I believe on Sunday going into Monday, that Mary Louise Miller unfortunately sadly passed away over the weekend. I believe at the age around 71 or 72 years old. Mary Louise Miller was the owner of the number 70 car in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Drivers like Johanna Long, I believe Shelby Howard also drove the organization many, many years ago, and she was the stable of the team in the late 2000s going into the early 2010s. My thoughts and prayers do go out to the Miller family during this time. Very tragic situation for the family. And my condolences do go out to the Miller family during a very tragic and a very unfortunate time. I believe she was, like I said, in her early 70s at this point. So my thoughts and prayers do go out to the Miller family during this tragic moment and this tragic time as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Xfinity Series race at Charlotte. As it was announced on Monday that there is officially a new start time for the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Charlotte Motor Speedway. The new start time is going to be 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This race, I believe, was already scheduled for 4 or 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The reason they're pushing it back a little bit is so that we can get a night race on Saturday. Remember, there is going to be temporary lighting that is going to be in the infield this year for this event event at Charlotte, which I think is actually a really, really good decision, because if you're going to push this event back into later in the day, you better have lights prepared for this. So I'm glad to see they've gone ahead and got lights prepared for this event, and I think 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is actually a really solid call, in my opinion, to have a night race. I actually like the fact there is going to be a night race this year at the track and the event as well. I think that's really good to see. I'd love to see that. And again, I think 5 p.m. Eastern is solid. It's not spectacular by any stretch of imagination, but I think the start time is solid for sure. And I like that we're going to be starting the event a little bit later in 2025, and we'll be having it later start time. I think it's a decent start time overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kansas Speedway. With Chase Elliott making the last lap pass during the Hollywood Casino 400 on Sunday, it was confirmed by the NASCAR Inside Scout that Chase Elliott's last lap pass was the 7th one of the 2025 season. That is now the most in a single season where we've had last lap passes. I gotta be honest, I'm definitely shocked we've had 7 of those so far in 2025. I know we had a last lap pass in the Daytona 500. I know we had when Byron won. I know we had a last lap pass during, I believe it was the second Daytona race when Ryan Blaney picked up the winning victory. I believe at Talladega we might have had a last lap pass at Austin Center, but I can't remember. I believe Atlanta, for both races, we had a last lap pass as well. And now Kansas joins the list. So there is one that I don't really remember off the top of my head where we've had a last lap pass, but to have 7 last lap passes so far 2025 is absolutely phenomenal, and it shows that we've had some decent racing, even though I think overall there's been a downgrade in racing at points. I think the last 2 weeks in particular, I think there has been some improvement, and I think things have definitely gotten a little better for sure when it comes to the racing product, and I really hope that does continue going forward, where the racing product can continue to get better. So I think we're headed towards a step in the right direction. I think there's some phenomenal things to look at that front for sure. And nonetheless, really happy and glad to see that we had some decent ratings this time around at the track. Not ratings, but decent racing and a really solid last lap finish to get our 7th last lap pass of 2025 in the Cup Series. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Connor Zilisch. Now, over the weekend in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race on Saturday at Kansas Speedway, Connor Zilisch finished in 2nd place. What this means is now Connor Zilisch has scored 16 consecutive top 5 finishes in NASCAR Xfinity Series competition. He has now surpassed Sam Art and now has the most consecutive top 5 finishes in NASCAR Xfinity Series history with 16. To surpass Sam Art, who is considered one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR Xfinity Series competition, is absolutely phenomenal. And what Connor Zilisch has been doing so far, especially in 2025, but in the last 16 races in particular, is absolutely phenomenal. His average finish in the last 16 races is like a 2.1 or 2.2 or something like that. And in that stretch, he's won a ton of races as well. And going into this weekend in particular at the Charlotte Roval, he's got a really good chance to win. He could extend that streak and get his 17th consecutive top 10. In fact, it would not surprise me if Connor Zilisch does in fact finish in the top 5 for the remainder of the season. Now, you do have Talladega that could unfortunately affect that chance and opportunity of happening, but I think Connor Zilisch has a really strong chance and opportunity to do that, and I think he will be very fast when we do run the race this weekend at the Roval. I think he's going to be fast at super speedways, and I think he'll be really, really strong as we get closer to the end of the season. So I think he's been just doing a fantastic job this year, and like I said, to have 16 consecutive top 5 finishes in the Xfinity Series, I think is awesome to see. Congratulations, Connor, on doing that, and I hope he does continue doing that going forward into the future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, over the weekend, I believe it was on Friday going into Saturday, Kyle Larson actually met up with members of the Kansas City Chiefs. Among those is Patrick Mahomes, and also I believe Travis Kelce were there as well. He also got a nice commemorative helmet. I believe he also got a jersey from, I believe, Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes there. Now, I think some of the reason this connection is because of the Amazon Prime connection. I believe Patrick Mahomes is part of the Prime family, if I'm not mistaken. And, of course, Kyle Larson is also part of the Prime family. The Prime family being, of course, owned by KSI and Logan Paul. So that's something I think a big reason for this. But a lot of people are going to say, like, the two evil empires, because a lot of people consider Kyle Larson maybe evil. And, of course, a lot of people don't like the Kansas City Chiefs, even though I'm a pretty big fan of the Kansas City Chiefs. I think it's pretty cool to see this, regardless of how you feel about the Chiefs, regardless of how you feel about Larson. I think having two of the most important figures and two of the most important parties in their respective sports, I think is absolutely phenomenal to see. So I think that's cool and pretty awesome to see that Kyle Larson got the chance and opportunity to collab with the Kansas City Chiefs and get the opportunity to work with Patrick Mahomes. I do like that opportunity came to play this year. Pretty cool to see that Larson got the chance to collab with the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dale Blaney. Now, over the weekend on Saturday night at Sharon Speedway, Dale Blaney held off hard-charging Buddy Kofoid and David Gravel and the top drivers in the World of Outlaws field and picked up a win at Sharon Speedway. With him winning the race at Sharon, he is now, of course, 61 years old. He becomes the oldest winner in World of Outlaws history. Now, Dale Blaney, I believe, of course, is a champion of the World of Outlaws, just like his brother, Dave Blaney, who has won a championship, who had actually held the previous record at 58 years old. Now, Dale Blaney officially holds that record. To see Dale Blaney at 61 years old go out there and pick up a win in the World of Outlaws, I think that's absolutely amazing to see because I think Dale Blaney is an incredible dirt racer. Of course, at one point, was drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers. To see him go from that and now be the oldest winner in the history of the World of Outlaws is great. And I know there's records to be broken, but to break the record and be 61 years old, I think, and just go out there and win, I think that's absolutely amazing and great to see. So nonetheless, congratulations to him on picking up the win in victory. He absolutely earned the win. He earned the right to pick up those wins and to beat Buddy Kofoid, who's been extremely good, to beat David Gravel, who is going to win the World of Outlaws Championship this year. Just to do that, I think you should be really happy about that and be very proud about that at this point. Nonetheless, congratulations to Dale Blaney on picking up the win in the victory in that event and winning a World of Outlaws race. It's tough to win some of those races nonetheless, so congratulations to him on going out there and picking up the win in victory. Congratulations to him on winning the World of Outlaws event. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Niles Coolin and Kato Notion Ota. As it was announced over the last couple days on Monday that Niles Coolin and Calco Notion Ota will test at Mid-Ohio in a couple days. Actually, today, as a matter of fact, they will be testing at Mid-Ohio. Ota will be testing for Meyershank Racing, while Niles Coolin will be testing for Chip Ganassi Racing. This is basically a rookie orientation test. We already talked about it yesterday, but Mick Schumacher also will be testing in Mid-Ohio in about 2 weeks from now on October 13th. Today, October 1st, they will get the chance and opportunity to test. And of course, the reason why you have Meyershank and Chip Ganassi testing on the same day is because you have the alliance between Meyershank Racing and, of course, Chip Ganassi currently at this moment right now. Niles, I believe, has been competing in Indy Lights this season, had some decent success, but not been great so far this year. And in Notion Ota, I believe, has been successful in some of the Super Formula stuff, so they're trying to get these guys prepared just in case down the road, if they ever decide to go ahead and race in IndyCar, that they now have a shot to do that. And getting this test in Mid-Ohio, they'll be able to be granted that chance and opportunity here very, very soon. So I'm excited to see what Niles Coolin and Cat Notion Ota do in their test coming up here very, very soon. And I think they will have a chance to be pretty successful in that test. We'll see how things go, but good opportunity for them, and glad to see they'll get the chance and opportunity to have that test at Mid-Ohio coming up here soon. Good to see they're getting the chance to work with their organizations and group for these events. Pretty exciting stuff. Good to see they'll get the opportunity to have their test coming up at Mid-Ohio here relatively soon, coming up later today. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim. Now, I believe it was on Thursday or Friday, Corey Heim got a really awesome shout out from Pat McAfee. Obviously, there's been a ton of conversation about Dodge, and Pat McAfee basically said that Corey Heim should actually just leave Toyota altogether and go over to the Dodge program for 2026 so he can have a layaway up to moving up in 2026, because he talked about the dominance he's had so far in the 2025 season. I think having Pat McAfee, who's one of the biggest people in the sporting world, basically give you a big shout out, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And I think it just shows how amazing Corey Heim has been so far in the 2025 season. He has really been incredible in the Craftsman Truck Series with 9 wins so far this year, and one of the favorites to win the Craftsman Truck Series race on Friday night at the Charlotte Roval, though he's going to have to go through probably the best road course racer in the lower series, that being Connor Zillage. And I think that Connor will give him absolutely run for his money in that event. Now, obviously, Corey Heim is going to be signed with Toyota once again for 2026. It is expected that Corey will be not full-time with any team next season, which is really unfortunate because, in my opinion, Corey Heim should absolutely be full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series right now. The fact that he's not full-time next year in the Cup Series, I think is absolutely a travesty. So I really hope in the near future he gets to move up to the Cup Series and gets an opportunity to move up. Because obviously he wants to go full-time with 2311. Obviously, of course, with the lawsuit, there's a lot of unknowns around that, if that's even going to happen at this point. So I really hope he does get that chance to go full-time in the future. He's really, really good. Shows a lot of speed on a week-by-week basis. And I just hope he continues to get better. And I hope he gets a better opportunity here really soon, because again, he deserves to be full-time in NASCAR. I really hope he does get to go full-time and race once again in 2026. It's a shame he won't be, more than likely, but I think he should be full-time because he has been absolutely phenomenal and has been doing an amazing job so far this year in the Craftsman Truck Series, over 20 career wins at this point, and I think he'll continue winning more races going forward into the future, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ben Mayer. As it was announced yesterday that Ben Mayer will drive the 02 truck for Young's Motorsports this weekend in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at the Charlotte Roval. I believe Ben Mayer made his Truck Series debut earlier this year at Lime Rock Park, where I believe he scored a top 25 or even a top 30 finish in that race. Ben Mayer, I believe, is part of some of the TA2 conversation. I think he's been with Nitro Motorsports in the past, so he does have quite a bit of experience, and I believe he's been winning some races in the lower series as well. Now, obviously, Young's Motorsports, we know they're not one of the fastest organizations in the world, but joining up with a team like them to get some experience, I think, is really important for a young driver like Ben, who is still a relatively young driver at this point. So I think Ben is going to have a decent chance for a decent performance. We've seen Young's Motorsports at times actually show some really solid pace and really good speed. There's also been times, however, where they haven't been phenomenal and have not been incredible. So I really think there's a chance for Ben to be pretty fast and competitive here. I really hope he can do a fantastic job this time around and can be really good for Young's Motorsports at the Charlotte Roval. I think he's got a solid opportunity here. We'll see what he can do, and we'll see if Ben can show some really solid pace and really strong speed this weekend at the Charlotte Roval, with Young's Motorsports hoping to have a really strong run with the team this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tyler Tomasi. As it was announced on Monday morning that Tyler Tomasi will drive the number 69 for MBM Motorsports this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. Originally, the plan was that Derek White was going to drive the number 69 at the Charlotte Roval, but unfortunately, due to suffering, I believe, some sort of injury during the Truck Series race at New Hampshire, where he had a flat tire crash really hard into the outside wall, Derek White is still recovering from those injuries, and Tyler will step in and drive behind the wheel. This is not a bad guy to replace him, by the way. I've been pretty high on Tyler Tomasi. I think Tyler does have a lot of potential. He has shown some decent stuff in the lower series, and I actually think Tyler could be pretty competitive, and this is going to be back-to-back race that he is going to run, because remember, it was announced not too long ago that he'll be working with LA Productions, and he'll be driving the number 69 at Talladega in the next Truck Series race coming up here relatively soon. I expect Tyler Tomasi probably to not be a massive contender, though, because MBM Motorsports equipment isn't the fastest out there, but it's really good to see that MBM is expanding their portfolio and running more races this year. I would expect they're probably going to run full-time in the Truck Series next year, and might put Tyler behind the wheel of that truck full-time next year. We don't know what the plans are exactly for him going into next season, but I think Tyler would be a solid candidate to put behind the wheel at this point, so we'll see what happens for Tyler, but I think it's a solid opportunity for sure, and glad to still get the chance and opportunity to go with MBM. I hope Derek can recover soon so that he can get back behind the wheel. I hope that there's some recovery process so he can get it, because he has to be approved by doctors to get back behind the wheel. We'll see what happens, but good to see that Tyler Tomasi will get the chance and opportunity to join up with MBM Motorsports this weekend in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at the Roval. I think he's got a solid chance and opportunity to show some good stuff, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Andrew Patterson. As it was announced on Monday morning that Andrew Patterson will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut this weekend at the Charlotte Roval, as he'll drive the number 32 car for Jordan Anderson Racing. First, before anyone asks, Austin Green is in the field this weekend. He'll drive the number 87 car. So Jordan Anderson Racing will have 4 cars. That car will have to qualify its way in, as there will be 42 entries in the event. Andrew Patterson, though, has been turning heads in ARCA so far in 2025. He has been absolutely impressive in that 40 car, the team that his family owns. He's been in the top 10 there on pure pace and speed. And in the few races he's gotten a chance to work on Nitro Motorsports, that of course being at Salem, he was really, really fast there, finishing the runner-up position behind Brendan Butterbean Queen. And I think Andrew has shown a ton of promise and potential. Now, I don't know how much road course experience Andrew Patterson has, because I think road course experience is going to matter a ton going into this weekend at the Charlotte Roll. But I really think that Andrew has a really good opportunity here. I think he will be fast and competitive for sure, because Jordan Anderson Racing's road course program has been decent. And if he does have road course experience, I think it really could play a role in him being really good this weekend. So we'll see what happens for Andrew. I think this is a great opportunity for him. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. And I think if Jordan can, it would be interesting if he can go full-time with this program next year. Not sure what the plans are for Jordan Anderson Racing at this point, but I think it's a solid opportunity for Andrew. I think he's going to have a chance to be pretty competitive for sure. We'll see how things go, but I'm excited to see what he can do this weekend at the Charlotte Roval. And I think it's going to be a good opportunity to work with this team going into the event at the Charlotte Roval with Jordan Anderson Racing. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Zane Smith. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Cup Series race on Sunday, you probably saw a wild and scary flip that took place during the event. Coming to the white flag on the first overtime of the race, I believe someone ended up spinning out, and I believe John Henry-Machek ended up crashing, and Zane Smith got hit, and he would actually wall right up on that outside wall, and eventually ended up flipping upside down, and I believe went on his roof, and then they got the car back up on the air, and then Zane Smith luckily was able to get out of the car. That was a very scary and wild flip, and one of the wildest, and I did not think when I went to the race on Sunday, I did not think I'd be seeing a flip. So for me to see a flip, I think is absolutely wild. But for Zane, the first thing is that I think we all could talk about the safety of these next-gen cars. One, I think the safety has absolutely gotten better, but it just shows where the safety in the sport has gone in many, many years. But that felt very similar to like the wall ride like Casey Kane had in like 2010. What's very wild about that is the fact that then basically in 2010, Casey Kane flipped. That was a 38 car at that point. And then in 2005, Mark Truex Jr. got the receiving end in 38 at the time. Mike Walsh driving at Richmond at the Emerson Radio 250. We saw Mark Truex Jr. wall ride, still come back there and finish the race. I think for Zane, the most important thing is that he was all right after that crash. We haven't seen a massive amount of flips so far this year, so to see a flip at an intermediate track is absolutely crazy to see, because I think that we've seen that from time to time, and Kansas has produced some of that where we have seen flips at this point. Another wild fact is that a driver sponsored by Napa is going on to win the same race. I may remember back in 2003, Ellie Sadler flipped upside down. Michael Waltrip went on to win the event. Then in 2025, we see Zane Smith flip upside down, and then Chase Elliott goes on and wins the event. To me, I think the flip was absolutely kind of wild to see for sure. Again, the most important thing is that Zane Smith was all right after the crash and the flip and got out of the car. I'm glad to see he was okay after that, and I'm glad to see he got out of the car and was able to continue and get out. And again, he should be cleared for this weekend at Charlotte. We haven't been an official report on that at this point, but like I said, I expect Zane Smith to be cleared to race this weekend. That's the most important thing, is that he can get back behind the wheel and race really soon. Glad to see that he was all right after the flip that took place at the track at Kansas. Glad to see it was all right after what happened there on the track. Good to see he was all right. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the CW. Now, during the practice sessions for the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Kansas Speedway, there was a new setup that many of you probably saw, where basically you saw Parker Clearman, Adam Alexander, and Jamie Murray talking in a studio in Charlotte. Meanwhile, we didn't see a massive amount of the on-track activity, especially early, and during the majority of the practice session, we saw those three guys talking. And basically, they asked, what's your thoughts on this? I'm going to be real and honest, this is probably one of my least favorite things that the CW has done. I think the CW has definitely done a lot of positives so far this year. I think their coverage has actually been really good so far in 2025, despite being a new platform. But there have been a couple issues that I've noticed with the CW so far this year. Number one, people not being able to access all across the country. This is still an issue going through the majority of the first year. And I had heard rumors they were looking to have the app ready to go. It seems like that's kind of faded, unfortunately, at this point. But I really think they absolutely need to figure out how to get the app working and running at this point so people can tune in that don't have the CW in certain parts. Now, the affiliates have been told to try to show the race over some of the football games going on, I'm pretty sure, but that is something that has to be worked on. Second thing, remote broadcast. I'm not a big fan with them with Fox, but I can't just say, oh, it's bad that Fox does it and good thing CW does it. I think the remote broadcasts are really cheap. I think that's something that absolutely needs to change. I think for broadcast, you need to be at the racetrack. I don't know why broadcasts across sports in general are going this direction, but I think that they need to be at the track. I think there's no reason why, especially some of the tracks we've seen, like Rockingham earlier this year, there was a remote broadcast. I didn't get that one, for example. I kind of understand Portland a little bit, but I think they should be at the racetrack, in my opinion, for races like this. Is I think it makes the broadcast feel a lot bigger when you're actually at the track than not being at the track. And then this practice setup they had wasn't the biggest fan of this either. Other than that, though, I think there's been a lot of positive to come from the CW so far this year. Just wasn't the biggest fan of this new setup that they had. I think things could have been better with this new setup for sure, but I like some things in it. I think there's some good things that come out of it. I don't think everything is positive, though, but I think there's definitely some good things come out of this new setup. I think there's some decent stuff to look at for sure that they probably could take and use for future stuff, and probably also things they may not want to use going forward into the future as well. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daniel Hemric. As it was announced on Friday that Daniel Hemric will drive the number 11 car for Kaulig Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series for 2 more races this season. He will race at the Charlotte Roval this weekend, and then he'll race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway as well. Daniel Hemric is a decent road course racer, and I think this is an amazing opportunity for Daniel Hemric to get. Actually, I think it's actually Talladega. I'm pretty sure that he is going to drive the number 11 car. But I think for Daniel Hemric, this is going to be a really solid opportunity to work with Kaulig Racing once again. And it kind of talks to some of the rumors that have been going around that maybe Daniel Hemric could be involved with the Kaulig Racing program in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series next season, or could end up back over there in 2026. Hemric was actually solid at Gateway. I think he had a top 10 car in that event, and I expect Hemric, especially at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, a track where he's been pretty decent in the past, especially in Xfinity competition. I could see Hemric running really well because remember, Kaulig Racing is the defending winner of that race in the fall at Vegas with AJ Allmendinger, and if the 11 is very similar to the 16 speed, I can see a Kaulig car going out there and picking up the win and getting a victory. But I expect Hemric to be solid for sure. I don't think he'll be absolutely the favorite by any stretch of the imagination to be a major contender for the win in these events, because Connor Zilch and the Junior Motorsports cars and the Joe Gibbs Racing cars in general have been absolutely phenomenal so far in the 2025 season. And I think it's going to be really difficult to beat those cars coming up in the next few weeks, especially closing out this year, and there's still unknowns exactly what the full lineup is going to be. We are expecting that Christian Eckes likely will be back with Kaulig Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2026. We'll see what happens there. I think it's good that Kaulig is going to have Daniel Hemric over there, have a veteran in the program who has a lot of veteran experience and always does a phenomenal and really solid job. Good to see Hemric getting the chance to work with the team once again, and I'm glad to see he'll get the opportunity to work with them for a few more races in the 2025 season. Get the opportunity to race at the Roval or Talladega, and get the opportunity to race at Vegas, a decent super speed racer, and also a pretty solid road course guy too. We'll see what Daniel Hemric can do in the next couple races in the Xfinity Series for Kaulig Racing. Good opportunity for him coming up relatively soon. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about testing. Now, it was reported by the NASCAR Massage Count, I believe it was on Thursday going into Friday, that there was supposed to be a test that was supposed to take place at the Charlotte Roval for October 20th. That was going to be all the manufacturers for Chevrolet, Ford, and Toyota. However, according to them, the Roval test for October 20th in a couple weeks from now has officially been postponed. The reason, according to them, is because there's been some ECU issues that have come into play. They have a company called McLaren. Of course, McLaren that has a team in Formula One, also a team in IMSA, and also owns a major manufacturing company as well. Basically, there's been some ECU issues with McLaren that has been having some issues in the testing line to get everything set up at that point. And that's a massive reason why this test is likely been postponed. This also would have been likely the first time we've seen the Chevrolet bodies. Now, we're going to talk about the Chevy bodies here in just a short little bit, but I think that when you look at the ECU issues, I think that is definitely a major issue. When you have, of course, the supply line, the supply chain being controlled by one entity and one company, it's not surprising to see that there's issues that can creep up overall. And I think that that's something that does need to be addressed going forward, and especially with the next-gen car, depending on what happens in the suit, those changes could end up being made. But we'll see what happens here relatively soon on that. But kind of crazy that we're still having ECU issues in the 4th year of this car, really almost the 7th, 8th year when you think about it, because we're now probably in the second half of the era of the next-gen car, and we're still having issues in the assembly line, trying to get new parts for McLaren to get everything fixed up. I would expect, though, that they will likely still have this ECU test. They're trying to prepare for new electric components that are coming in. It's obviously rumored that Dodge is likely going to have a Cup Series operation in 2027, most likely with Kaulig. And there's also new engine components coming in. There's been rumors, like I said, about Honda potentially making a comeback and return. And they want to have a lot of these components ready to go just in case a new manufacturer comes in, like Honda, for example, that would probably like to come in relatively soon. So we'll see what happens and if they can get this issue figured out and taken care of, because I think a new manufacturer in the sport, I think, is really important. So the sooner we can get that figured out and can get that resolved, I think that it will be good for the sport. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see what can happen here in the future. But I think it's important they try to fix and resolve these issues and problems. Glad to see they're looking to be able to resolve them. I just hope they can get this testing done so we can test these new ECUs going forward in the future. Hope it can happen relatively soon. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen had a really impressive day at Kansas Speedway, and I did a video talk about this on the channel after the Cup Series race concluded on Sunday when I was heading back from the trip over there. Where Shane Van Gisbergen in the Red Bull car scored his first ever top 10 oval finish in the NASCAR Cup Series at Kansas Speedway by scoring a 10th place finish. And what's really impressive about this finish is the fact that Shane Van Gisbergen actually had to start at the rear of the field and actually had to do a stop-and-go penalty and win a lap down. He got back on the lead lap and charged his way back up to the front, and slowly but surely throughout the day, he was passing some really good guys. He got by William Byron, Austin Cindric, Kyle Busch, even past his teammate Ross Chastain at the end of the day, and would be inside the top 15. Then there were some pit stops that happened. He moved forward, took 2 tires, I believe, on one of the final pit stops, and moved inside the top 10 at that point. And then, of course, like I said, he came off the corner and finished in 10th place. Got by Ross Chastain to actually do that, but what is really important about this is he is finally starting to figure out these ovals. There has been a ton of talk throughout this year about, Shane Van Gisbergen, he's going to be amazing on road courses this season, but he may not be that great on ovals. Well, I will say the last couple weeks especially, I've been noticing a trend where Shane is starting to get a lot better. Shane Van Gisbergen was running in the top 10 for a majority of the early portion of the race at New Hampshire Motor Speedway and was absolutely doing a phenomenal job there. Did lose some track position due to, unfortunately, getting caught up in bad pit stops, and then Brad Keselowski made a little bit of an over-aggressive move. Had that not happened, I think he had a top 5, top 10 potential and could have gotten a top 10 there at New Hampshire. Just think about this. We've been wanting to see progression from Shane Van Gisbergen this season, and I think that progression is really starting to come into play, and I think it's really starting to take effect as well as Shane is continuing to get better as a race car driver. I would expect that going into next year, because I would not be surprised if he gets another top 10 before the end of the year on an oval. If he can get 7, 8 top 10s, he could be a legitimate championship contender, because that's 14 or 15 top 10s, and he could legitimately have a fantastic season. And I think that this is a major step in the right direction for this 88 team. Maybe they just need to put the guy who, Caius Elias, and I think that's who it is. They probably should put him as a crew chief for next season or bring someone else in to be the crew chief, because personally, I think what SVG did at this time was phenomenal, and I think this team is only going to get better. And he's obviously the favorite to win this weekend at the Roval, so he's probably going to win another race. We might be talking about him again this week, looking for his 5th win of the season. So we'll see what happens for Shane, but to score a top 10 finish and get that first ever top 10 oval finish, I think that's really important. Congratulations to him on getting that done, and good to see SVG was able to go out there and score a top 10 oval finish. Congrats to him once again on getting that top 10 oval finish in the Cup Series and scoring a 10th place finish at Kansas Speedway. Very impressive in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joe Gibbs Racing. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race at New Hampshire Motor Speedway last week, you probably saw the incident between Denny Hamlin and Ty Gibbs and Christopher Bell as well. Now, basically about halfway through the race, or around 110, 112 laps in the event, Denny Hamlin was getting really frustrated on the radio with Ty Gibbs about what they were doing on the racetrack, because Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell, of course, are competing for a championship currently at the moment, while Ty Gibbs is the only Joe Gibbs Racing driver who did not make the playoffs due to not having as much speed early early in the season and kind of not having the best season even compared to his teammates at this point. Then Denny Hamlin would basically wreck Ty Gibbs and put Ty Gibbs in the outside wall. And then Ty Gibbs basically said game on. And then Denny Hamlin was complaining about Ty Gibbs quite a bit on the radio. Joe Gibson basically said after the race concluded that basically everything needs to be figured out on the racetrack. And we don't really need to get involved as leadership at the company. Now, according to what was reported over the weekend, there was a meeting that took place over the weekend with all the drivers involved. Christopher Bell, Ty Gibbs, Chase Briscoe, and Denny Hamlin all spoke at that Joe Gibbs Racing meeting. Denny Hamlin spoke to the media first, and he said it was actually a very productive meeting. I said some things I shouldn't have said, and I do regret some of the things that I did say on the radio and probably didn't make the right judgments and moves at that point. I probably should have been a little better about that. Meanwhile, Ty Gibbs was running away from the media all weekend. According to Jeff Gluck, on Saturday, while I was, of course, headed to the racetrack, Jeff Gluck reported that a lot of media members were trying to catch Ty Gibbs and speak to Ty Gibbs about what happened on the racetrack. And Ty Gibbs, according to them, actually ran away from the media. Bob Pockers, of course, was trying to chase after him, and Bob was racing, step walking toward him very, very quickly. And Ty Gibbs got in a golf cart and didn't speak to the media. I think that's the best thing to say. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. But running away from the media, probably not the smartest decision for Ty Gibbs. But again, Ty Gibbs probably knows that if I say something really stupid, it might come back to haunt me, and the media might say something and take something out of context. So I can't entirely blame Ty Gibbs for trying to run away from that situation happening right there. For Ty Gibbs especially, though, I think Ty Gibbs and I think both drivers have to take some responsibility in that situation. New Hampshire Motor Speedway. For Denny Hamlin, I think while I understand the frustration, he didn't need to be that extremely aggressive into Ty Gibbs. Though I do understand the frustration, like I said, from Denny Hamlin. I also think for Ty Gibbs' position, he could have backed off a little bit and let Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell go. That is a teammate for crying out loud. So I would have actually backed, if I was in Ty Gibbs' position, I probably would have backed off in that situation because I personally believe that Ty Gibbs probably should have just let him go and race over there instead of just holding them up because he was basically holding him up. And I think that's why Denny Hamlin got pissed off and frustrated at Ty because I think he knows, hey, we've got to go out there and try to win this championship. Meanwhile, you're holding us up and you're affecting our opportunity and chance to go out there and compete. But the good news is, at least there was a productive meeting here, and I'm glad to see that they at least can come to some sort of agreement going forward. Now, obviously, that meeting between Bubba Wallace, Denny Hamlin, all of them after what happened in Kansas, that's going to be very interesting for sure. We know Denny Hamlin's unapologetic for that at this point, so I'm very interested to see that meeting at 2311 Racing at this point as well. Nonetheless, glad to see the meeting seemed to be pretty successful for all parties at this point, and now they can fully focus on trying to compete for the win for a championship. We've got one race left in the final round for the round of 8, which Bubba Wallace and those guys are probably going to have a really difficult time getting in at this point. Nonetheless, so we'll see how things go. But it's interesting the meeting happened. It seemed like the meeting was pretty successful in some ways for Joe Gibbs Racing. Glad to see that meeting was solid and successful. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Kansas TV ratings from this past weekend. And honestly, they are not really good. As reported by Adam Stern, USA got a 0.79 rating and 1.49 million viewers for Sunday's NASCAR Cup race at Kansas. That is off from a 0.96 rating and 1.8 million in 2024. That is a 300,000 drop in viewership from 2024. That means we dropped 17% from 2024 going into 2025. That number is still not, now, is that as big of a drop as like New Hampshire, for example? No, we had a 500,000 drop. Kansas Speedway obviously is going to bring at least some more people in than New Hampshire Motor Speedway is going to bring in, for example. But still dropping over 300,000 is still a big drop. Again, I've seen the excuse about the NFL coming into play, and I'll tell you what, I'm kind of tired of the NFL excuse at this point. I get that you had the Kansas City Chiefs, and you had issues with that, and I get the attendance for the event probably played a role from the Chiefs game, for example, but I don't understand why people just continue bringing up the NFL as the only reason for the ratings drop. There is obviously a lot of other reasons why the ratings are dropping in NASCAR right now. Obviously, the playoffs, I do think, play a major role. I think there is genuine fatigue in the sport right now, obviously from the lawsuit, obviously from some of the bad racing prior, which is a shame. I think the racing actually right now, the last 2 weeks, in fact, I don't think there's been a terrible race in the playoffs so far. In fact, I think the last bad race we actually saw might have been Watkins Glen, I'm pretty sure. I think all the the races since then have either been solid, okay, or actually pretty good. But I think people have just been generally, because we had a bad stretch of races there for quite some time. And I do think cable does play a role as well a little bit. I think having more races on cable and having less races on broadcast and over-the-air broadcast like the CW has shown. Now, we never got those ratings from the CW. We might get those later today. But I will say that I think having less races over the air does play a role a little bit in that, but I think the playoff format also plays a major role. That's why there is continuing to be a ton of talk and a ton of conversation at this moment that we're going to go back to full season championship in the future. And yeah, there's probably going to be likely some sort of playoff format next year, but I think going back to full season championship, I think is the way to go. Maybe you'll have a decrease in ratings at this point, but what do you have to lose at this point with basically not going back to full season? I think going back to full season will at least be part other thing that can really help the sport at least get in a little bit of a better direction. But we're continuing to see big drops. We have had more double-digit decreases in percentages for every single NASCAR Cup Series playoff race so far in 2025. And I think we got to figure out a solution. I think the big solution is going back to full season championship. We'll start it. Again, I mentioned this yesterday. I don't think it'll be the full thing. We've got to fix the racing product. But I think if you want to keep your core fans around, I think going back to full season is the way to go at this point. So I really hope NASCAR is listening and they can get back to full season championship in the future, because I think that will solve some of your issues. I think it will solve some of your problems. And I think, again, if you can make the racing also a little bit better as well, I think that's the best thing that can happen. So we'll see what happens here going forward. Hopefully the ratings can get a little bit better for sure, because I think the ratings right now are not that good. There's a lot that needs to be done to get the sport, like I said, in a much better position. Hope we can make the racing product better and we can get things better in the sport going forward into the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Nick Sanchez, as it was confirmed in a front stretch interview that Nick Sanchez will be returning to Big Machine Racing in 2026, continuing to drive the number 48 car once again. This is definitely a really big deal. There's obviously been rumors and speculation in recent weeks that Nick Sanchez could be on the move. There was talk about him being a candidate to go over to Junior Motorsports for the 2026 season and potentially drive the number 88 car, as of course Connor Soch will move up full-time to the Cup Series next season. But we are expecting there's not going to be any full-time driver behind the wheel of the number 88 car next year. There is a chance that Corey Day and Raja Kruf could be driving the 88 car next season. There was also talk about potentially if Jesse Love moved up to the NASCAR Cup Series next year, Legacy Motor Club, then Nick could be integrated to drive the number 2 car next year. What this tells me is that more than likely for at least 2026, we are probably going to see Nick Sanchez stay in Nick stay in 48. This probably tells me that Jesse Love more than likely is going to stay in the number 2 car in 2026. But I do like this move for Nick and Big Machine Rides. You have a chemistry that you can really build going into next year. I think that Nick has been phenomenal with Big Machine Racing so far in 2025. He got that win earlier in the year at Atlanta Motor Speedway and has shown a lot of potential this year. Has Nick made mistakes in 2025? There's no doubt about that, but young rookies are going to make mistakes like that who don't have the most experience out there. And I think as we get into 2026, I really think that Nick is only going to get better as a driver, because again, I think Nick Sanchez has shown a ton of promise, and I think he's really shown a ton of potential so far in the 2025 season. He's been phenomenal this year at times, been really good at super speedways, shown a ton of speed on the road courses as well. And I think it would be a major, major mistake to replace him with the money driver. Unless you could put like Parker Kligerman back behind the wheel, I really don't see there being a way for things to get better for them at this point. So I really hope that Nick can, as a driver, continue to get better going into next season. Now, the big question a lot of you are probably going to be asking is, what does this mean for some of the other things? Obviously, like I mentioned, Jesse Love more than likely is going to be back in the 2 car next season. He is not expected to go to the Cup Series full-time in the 2026 year. It is also expected more than likely that Christian Eckes, there was talk about Christian Eckes going over to the Junior Motorsports program also for next year. It is expected, though, that Christian will be staying with Collin Racing in 2026. We're only expecting maybe 2 or even 3 full-time drivers at Junior Motorsports next season. We know Justin Allgaier will be back in the 7 and Sammy Siff will be back in the number 8 car next year. but there's other drivers that still need to be announced and confirmed at this point for the upcoming year and season. Obviously, Roger Cruz, Corey Day are rumored currently at the moment to be going full-time next year. Obviously, not full-time, but at least part-time next year with Junior Motorsports. Corey Day has been mentioned for a full-time Hendrick Motorsports car for next year, but it's expected that that's not fully going to be the case at this point right now. And there's still some other moves that are still to be expected coming up here in the coming months as well that'll probably be announced here relatively soon. But going back to Nick Sanchez, very talented guy. There's a lot of people that actually think that Nick Sanchez in the future could be a full-time driver in the NASCAR Cup Series, and I think he's got that potential to be a full-time NASCAR Cup Series guy in the future as well. So we'll see what happens for Nick. I really hope he can have a ton of success, show some really good pace and speed. We'll see how he can do. We'll see if he can have a really good season next year, and we'll see if he can bring some good stuff to the table with the organization known as Big Machine Racing in the 2026 year. Glad to see he'll get a chance and opportunity to work with Big Machine Racing once again in the 2026 NASCAR Xfinity Series season with the organization and team. And now we're going to head jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Richard Childress. As there's been some rumors out there around Richard Childress currently at the moment that he could be retiring at the end of 2025. Now this comes from a Reddit post in the NASCAR Central account as well, where they basically say that Richard Childress is expected to announce retirement in an upcoming event coming up relatively soon, and Richard is going to confirm that he'll be retiring from being the owner of the organization at the end of 2025. Well, the RCR account, the admin that runs the RCR account on Twitter, has confirmed that Richard, in fact, will not be retiring at the end of 2025 and will continue being part of the organization and being the owner of the organization in the 2026 year. This doesn't shock me and surprise me because while I think Richard Childress is starting to get up there in age, Richard still wants to be involved in the team and the company as well. So this doesn't shock me or surprise me. But I will say this about Richard. I think at some point Richard is going to retire because Richard, like I said, going into next year, Richard Childress at the end of 2026 will be 81 years old. Meanwhile, his grandson, Austin Dillon, is going to be in his mid-30s at that point. And we've heard rumors that Austin Dillon could be retiring at any point right now. There's a chance Austin Dillon could retire in the near future. And I've said this before, but I think the smartest thing that Richard Childress can do at this point is back away from being the owner of the organization and let Ty and Austin run the organization in general, because I think one of the things that's been really holding RCR back, at least in recent years, is Richard's stubbornness. Richard has been extremely stubborn and has been not making the best moves. And I think he is part of the reason, unfortunately, why Kyle Busch hasn't been super successful in the last couple years in particular. Kyle Busch has been showing up with 30th place speed at times at a lot of tracks, like New Hampshire, for example. He qualified like 30th. At Kansas, he was like 35th on track speed, only beating like one car, that being the open car of the number 44 for J.J. Yeley, and just didn't show up with consistent pace and speed. And I think that's why a lot of people really want to see Richard retire and give up on being the owner of the team, but Richard can still be involved in the team in some way, shape, or form. But I think Richard wants to stick around and continue being part of the organization, and that's fine and understandable that he wants to continue being part of the team. Because I think anyone that's been an owner of the team for almost over 50 years, because remember, this team has been around since 1969 at this point. If I was still being an owner of a team, been around for almost 60 years, being part of this organization, I would like to continue sticking around as well. But I think Richard at this point doesn't have a massive amount of time. I think Richard will be retired within the next 5 years. That's my guess at this point. I think within the next 5 years, Richard will retire for sure. Could 2026 be the last year? I think that's a possibility. But we've been hearing rumors around this that Richard could retire in the future, and we've heard talks about the future. The goal ultimately long-term is for Austin Dillon to come in and run the operation and take over, and basically Mike also help run the operation as well, which I think would be the best for the company at this point. I think that they need to find a way to relinquish that ownership from Richard a little bit and let the grandkids and let some of the younger people in the organization help. Make Mike Verlander also help run the operation as well, because I think that Austin Dillon was a big reason in the first place while Kyle Busch ended up joining the organization and team. If it wasn't for Austin Dillon, I think you have Kyle Busch not basically driving for RCR, and Kyle got 3 wins in 2023, and they just haven't found that magic. I think there's a lot of things that really need to be shaken up. I mean, Randall Burnett is no longer part of the organization at the conclusion of the year, and people like to blame Randall Burnett for some of the problems, and Randall may be part of the issue, but he wasn't the full reason why Kyle Busch struggled. I just think that there needs to be some changes over there at RCR, and I think the sooner they can make those changes, I think the better it's going to be for everybody at those teams. So we'll see what happens with Richard. We'll see how long he does stay with the program. But like I said, I know Richard doesn't want to retire. He wants to stick around and continue being part of Richard Childress Racing long term. I know he wants to stay there and continue being the owner of the team. But I think in the near future, there is going to be a chance that Richard does, in fact, retire. I just think that there's that chance of really growing possibility. Because like I said, Richard's starting to get a little bit older. He's starting to show a little bit more age at this point. And I think it would be pretty smart for him to long-term give up the ownership ranks and let someone else run the operation to get the program back up and running. Because right now, in my opinion, RCR is struggling immensely right now, and I think the sooner they can make that move to get someone that has experience to come in there and run the team, I think it's going to be better for everybody involved. So we'll see what happens in the future for Richard, but like I said, there is a growing chance and possibility that Richard Childress could retire in the near future, and we could see a new person come in and run the organization. We'll see what happens, and we'll see if Richard does in fact retire. Again, I hear rumors that this could be happening in the near future. I don't expect, again, Richard to retire at the end of this year, but I think there's a chance that Richard Childress could retire at the end of the 2026 or 2027 season, and then at that point, potentially, we could see Austin run the organization and take over the reins of the organization going forward into the future. And now we're going to head on to the final major story of today's episode as we are talking about Cleetus McFarland once again. Now, we have heard a lot of rumors around Cleetus McFarland potentially being involved in the Dodge program in some way, shape, or form for the 2026 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series season. Obviously, we do know at this point that Kaulig Racing will be having a program and will be the Dodge program for 2026, but no driver has been officially announced and confirmed for that program. It was reported on Sunday by Adam Stern that Pat McAfee brought up Rand's NASCAR program on his show last week, along with Cleetus McFarland and Dana White being potentially involved in that program as well. There has been rumors and speculation as of recently now that Pat McAfee could be involved in the Dodge program going into 2026 and being involved in that rumor gong show that is expected to be going on. Let's go back to Cleetus McFarland real quick. There's been a lot of people saying that Cleetus could be involved in the Dodge program in 2026. There's also been people saying that he won't be involved in the program in 2026. Just something that is very important context to know. If Cleetus McFarland does in fact end up being involved in the Dodge Kaulig program in some way, shape, or form, Cleetus will not be full-time. Cleetus has a lot of other projects that he's working on currently at the moment right now, and I think Cleetus doesn't want to take away from working on those projects that he's got on YouTube currently at the moment. So I would not expect Cleetus to be full-time with Kaulig Racing next year if he does in fact end up over there, because he has confirmed recently that he will be in fact at Daytona International Speedway. We just don't know exactly in what capacity, whether that is going to be with Brett Jones Racing next year in the ARCA Series, or if he is going to end up being part of the program potentially at least next year with Kaulig. Because again, there's been rumors around him being part of it. If he, like I said, if he ends up with the Kaulig program next season, I think that he could absolutely be decent at some tracks. But I think that being full-time, this would show the Kaulig is not taking things very, very seriously. And we still don't know exactly, like I said, who exactly will be fully in the lineup. We've heard some names mentioned as possibilities. We've heard Brendan Butterbean Queen mentioned as a likely candidate, and we are expecting that Brendan Butterbean Queen will be full-time with Kaulig Racing in the Craftsman Truck Series next year. We've heard other names mentioned. We had heard Corey LaJoie's name mentioned as a possibility for this program. We don't expect Corey LaJoie, though, now to go down to the Craftsman Truck Series because Corey LaJoie has said in recent weeks that he's really just not interested in going in the Truck Series full-time, which, like I said, if you had an opportunity to go full-time with a team like Kaulig, I take that chance and opportunity because they're bringing a lot to the table at this point. So why not just try to go ahead and go full-time? I don't know what Corey LaJoie is thinking at this point. I think he's making a terrible decision that he doesn't want to go full-time at this particular moment. The other drivers we have heard LeVar Scott's name mentioned as a possibility for the program, but LeVar Scott hasn't been confirmed for anything for next year at this point. I think he's shown a lot of promise. Is he ready for a full-time Truck Series ride? Not sure at this moment right now. We've heard Connor Hall's name mentioned as a legitimate possibility. And there's been rumors around Tony Breidiger being part of the program. People mentioned Haley Deegan. Haley Deegan's been mentioned for potentially the McAnally-Hilgeman Racing Organization for next year, maybe being full-time. There's been talks that she's been around the shop of McAnally, and I would not be surprised if she's at least potentially being considered for a McAnally truck going into next season, as she struggled in Indy Lights, might want to come back to NASCAR next season. There's been a ton of talk about that. There's also been other drivers that have been linked over to the Kaulig program for next season. We've heard other names mentioned as potential possibilities. Daniel Dye continues to be brought up as a likely possibility for that program for 2026. But people mention, like, could we see other teams like Kaulig Racing? There were rumors about Rhett Jones Racing potentially having a program for next season, though Rhett Jones Racing, again, is not expected to have a program in the Craftsman Truck Series next year, though I could be wrong. They end up showing up. If Rhett Jones does end up being in trucks next year, Cleetus will likely be the driver. But going back to Cleetus, I would love to see Cleetus McFarland be part of the Craftsman Truck Series, at least on a part-time stint. Just think about this for a second. Cleetus McFarland brought a ton of eyes onto the sport. Cleetus has a massive YouTube channel. One thing that the Truck Series is struggling for is viewership, and it's struggling for attendance as well. There have been races this year in the Truck Series that have gotten under a quarter, I believe under a 250,000 views, and some under 300,000 views. And I know we talk about the Cup Series ratings not being very good, but the Truck Series ratings have just absolutely been unbelievably awful so far in 2025. I think if you bring Cleetus McFarland in, and Dodge coming in as well, you're probably not going to go back up to over 1 million. There's no way you're going to get that. But I certainly think you'll have an increase. You'll probably get over 500,000 for sure for some of those races. Hell, you may even get like 700,000, 800,000. I think they would probably like to be a little closer to the Xfinity Series on the TV rating side of things than be where they're at currently at the moment right now. I know they want to have major increases for the series right now, and I know the Truck Series, they want things to get better at this point. I think if you bring Cleetus in for at least a few races next year, I truly do believe that program will end up being a lot better. I think the Truck Series will be better. Cleetus will bring a lot of that personality that I think the Truck Series is missing, and especially you're going to have a big void with Corey Haim not being full-time next year. Granted, you're going to have people like Lane Riggs and Chandler Smith competing there, maybe Eric Almirola too, part-time. Who knows at this point? Probably Haley Deegan will bring some people in as she is in the series next year, but I think you need to find a way to kind of create not that big of a vacuum. I think you need to have people coming in to help run the series, and I think if Cleetus, like I said, is involved in the Truck Series some way, shape, or form, I think that would be really good for the sport, and I think it would certainly be really good for the series if he can find his way to be involved in the program next year. Is it likely that he will be full-time? No. Like I said, he will not be full-time in the series next year. If he does, in fact, end up going into the series next season, he'll be there only on a part-time basis in 2026. But there continues to be talk about it, and it's certainly interesting for sure. Pretty interesting that Pat McAfee also could be involved in the program. I think that is certainly interesting for sure. We'll see what happens for sure, and we'll see what goes on there. But like I said, there continues to be talk about Cleetus being potentially involved in the Dodge program. We'll see if he does, in fact, end up going there in 2026 and being involved with Kaulig at least on a part-time stint next year. So, that is today's NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts on today's video. You think Cleetus will go to the Dodge program next year? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. Or do you think it'll be an ARCA? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. And what are thoughts about potential other things like Rich Scholl's retiring in the future? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. If there's any other major news that breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow, we're going to have race picks for the NASCAR Cup and Truck Series, Xfinity Series races for the Charlotte Roval. Then on Friday, we'll have a NASCAR news video early in the morning, and then we also will have the Truck Series race video dropping later in the day. And then, of course, on Saturday and Sunday, with reactions to the Xfinity and Cup race from the Roval, reactions to qualifying as well. Then on Monday, we should have a NASCAR news video dropping at that point. We got a lot of content coming up. People like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Cleetus McFarland, Dodge Ram, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Ryan Preece, Brad Keselowski, Will Braun, Brock Feeding, Cam Waters, you name it. Frankie Muniz, all the good stuff. Talk about on the channel in the coming days and coming weeks as well, along with Connor Zilch, Junior Motorsports, and Suarez too. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.